So you can't CNC machine anything that you can't hold in place. And while you can rely on double-sided tape and adhesive work holding to do a brunt of the work when it comes to cutting large pieces, these small 5" by 4" or 5.5" by 4" dual vaults wouldn't really work well with adhesive work holding. Also, it wouldn't be repeatable, being able to batch out multiple without having to constantly reset and recenter the G-code, re-zero the machine, recalibrate. There's a lot of dead time in the middle of that. Enter a threaded wasteboard, something that I could attach a few specific parts to and then quickly batch products out over and over again very repeatably. Unfortunately, I didn't buy the threaded wasteboard table from my Shapeoko, but we're gonna make one. So the project for this starts with a 3/4 inch sheet of MDF. I go with MDF because it's pretty easy to make sure that it's square, considering it's processed and not just natural. You could go with something that has grain, but you do run the risk of potentially snapping on the grain lines with certain stresses, which we'll talk about later. Dimension the board down to the dimensions of the workable space of your Shapeoko. The problem that I have is this sheet of MDF was far too large for my table saw, since I don't have an outfeed table nor a crosscut sled. And I don't own a circular saw yet. Yeah, it seems like I'm buying these tools out of order, but whatever. So I realized I don't really need the edges of this to be perfectly straight. All I really need them is to be at dimension. So clamping a board into place and then jigsawing across the entire length of the MDF sheet was pretty functional until my board slipped. So I decided to get rid of the guide and just freehand it on the pencil line, making sure to give myself more space rather than less. That worked out pretty well. That little bit of extra on the side, not really going to impact the usage on the Shapeoko. From there, it's a matter of securing the board down, and I'm using this double stick carpet tape to secure everything in place on top of a pine board, which is just a processed piece of lumber, not raw, so I'm sure it's square and I'm sure it's level, even though it's not exactly machine level, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Using adhesive and securing it down, it's then off to carbide create. Now, for making the actual design of this wasteboard, I went with 50mm separations between each individual threaded insert location. And I'm doing this because a few of the clamps that I've seen, whether it be from carbide or other resources, pretty much just follow 50mm separations or increments of 50mm as the separation point. I also add these counterboard holes with a 9mm depression and then just enough of a thread to get all the way through the wasteboard. I did end up having to just have a small onion skin. My sheet of MDF was, it looks like, about 1/10 of a millimeter thicker than I was originally expecting it to be, but we'll talk about that later when it comes to countersinking. Now, on to the first major problem I encountered. The sweepy dust boot, which is now included with Shapeokos, is, let's say, not exactly perfect. It does attach directly to your router with this little plastic lip that holds it at the bottom of the router. That being said, the brushes aren't possible to be compressed by the standard Z axis, meaning that your threading will skip and you'll lose vertical Z steps, which will basically screw your whole design. I have to give a shout out over to the Shapeoko subreddit and Hobby CNC subreddits and the Shapeoko community forums for helping me figure this out. I can't realize how I didn't figure it out, so I went without the dust boot for the remainder of the project. Good for the carve, bad for the overall mess in my workshop. Okay, so not having the dust boot came with some complications and a heck of a lot more mess in my workshop, but we finally have a carved threaded table. Now to clean this up, vacuum it, do some test fits with my washers, and then flip it over and get on to the next step. From there, detach the board using the adhesive work holding, flip it over, and countersink all the holes so that the lip on all of the threaded inserts can rest below the threshold of the board. Make sure your staying with a relatively level working surface. Now, doing the countersinking saved me from that onion skid that I mentioned earlier. I just used a simple punch to make sure I knew where all of the holes would be, and then countersunk them, which got rid of the 1/10 of a millimeter, as well as set me up to have all the flanges installed properly. Okay, now we have a pretty nice threaded wasteboard, but it needs to, I can't let it go, it needs to get secured to the actual MDF. Now I was using this pine, just a simple flat, what I knew was flat and square pine board, which I now need to pry off of the MDF wasteboard. I was just holding it there with adhesive, and then countersink and make the mounting holes into the actual MDF wasteboard of the MDF board that comes with the Shapeoko to be able to bolt this down and hold it securely. Also, make sure to mark the mounting holes onto the actual MDF board that comes with your Shapeoko while the board is still in place before removing it from the place where you carved it. This is extremely important for positioning in case you have to go back and do any detail work or further enhancements. With the board itself complete, now the important part is to mount it to the Shapeoko. Remove the included MDF wasteboard, which comes with the Shapeoko and is bolted to the aluminum frame of the CNC, and then drill through the previously marked sections on the board with an 11/32 inch drill bit, which is the closest fractional drill bit to the Shapeoko threaded inserts. If you're using different ones, make sure to use the correct drill bit for your individual supplies. Countersink the back, drill in the threaded inserts using your handheld drill, which once you realize how hard and what thread and what clutch you need to run it, you can just blast through this pretty quickly. Then reinstall the board, reinstall your threaded wasteboard that you just made, and bolt through with 1/4-20 bolts and washers to secure on all of your mounting points to make sure it's fully in place. Now, here's where I have to come back to make sure that you mount it to the exact same place, because I actually realized that I had my mounting holes a little too shallow at first. I was only going 6 millimeters down, and I didn't leave myself enough space to be able to face the board later to make sure it's machine level. Also in the center, with the longer 1.5" 1/4-20 bolts, they were just slightly proud of the face of the board, which is extremely problematic and not allow for a level mounting using the threaded wasteboard. I dropped down an additional 3 millimeters in all of the mounting holes, and it dropped it down to 1 inch 1/4-20 bolts for the center strap, which happened to go over the aluminum body strap. I'd recommend, if you're making your own design, avoid going over any of the aluminum supports, or just know that you can go with a 1 inch 1/4-20 bolt and 1.5" on the sides, just for that extra little bit of stability. And that's pretty much it for this project. I'm now at the halfway point of what I need to be able to do quickly repeatable batch processing of different vaults or different CNC projects, as well as very simple work holding. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. If you want to see more CNC craziness or some of the other projects, whether it be for the Kickstarter, some of my resin work with other dice making videos, or anything else, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you, everybody. Be good to each other, and I will talk to you next time.